Hey guys, today we're going to start a new series which is going to be called Wristwatch Wednesday. And we're going to talk about what's on my wrist, and most probably we're going to try to find people that have really quirky and fun watches to share about in the next few videos. Today I want to talk about something that's really cool. It's from my collection. And you're going to see it here, and it's a Rodania Geometer. What's cool about this watch, I kind of went over it really shortly in one of the last videos, is that it actually shares the same kind of pedigree, dial, design and everything from the 1950s. It's as close as you can get to a 2915 Omega Speedmaster without that crazy six-figure plus price point. I do have here another one of the watches that's for sale on the website. It's a 105002, which kind of shares the same kind of looks as the Rodania from that era. So the Rodanias came in, and I think most of them were distributed in Montreal, Canada, mostly. So you do find them more often here than anywhere else in the world. I found, I think, 4 of them so far. I do have some new old stock cases, new old stock case backs, and they're not that common. Obviously, having a watch that's 70 years old, plus or minus, is already something of a feat to find it in very good condition. So that's why I have still a few of them in my collection, and they're really cool. They're amazing little watches, and let's dive into the similarities. First of all, back in the 50s, a lot of watches were kind of small, and the 34, 35, 36 millimeters. But having a watch like the Rodania around 38 millimeters is something really fun, just because in today's generation of watches, we're used to 40 millimeter plus for a lot of people. Therefore, I think the 38 right now is coming back into trend. It's also quite a big watch in terms of the way it looks, just because of the dial that's quite big for the era. And obviously a Speedmaster as we know it is more in the 41 millimeters, 42 depending on the case size. And that's why if you compare it with the straight lugs from the era, you're going to see cases that are around 38 millimeters. You do have a steel bezel on the Rodania with no scales, nothing other than a simplified version of the Speedmaster right here. And what you have is basically tachymeter bezel on the Speedy, which differentiates the two watches. But otherwise, if we would take them apart, they would look almost 85-90% identical. That's what's cool about the Rodania. You have something that does have the same dial as the Speedy. The main difference right here is the bezel that makes a huge difference in terms of proportions, or if you want to call it sizable difference to the eye. And you're gonna have basically very similar hands, and you do have a very early Speedmaster dial on the Geometer. If you compare it to the 1957 very early Speedmasters, you basically have the same subdials, the same font. You have everything that's identical except from the name and the logo that was applied in white gold on the Speedmaster. And this is obviously a radium dial. Some of them aged brown. I had, I believe, one of them that was extremely brown. I think that one ended up at a big dealer in Europe. But just to say, those watches are not something that you're gonna find every day. But if you do, and you have that, that need to have a very early Speedmaster that could actually complete your vintage collection in a very comfortable way, and it does look very, very, very well the same in terms of the dial, and the hands are also metallic, so you're looking at hands from the Speedmasters that were originally brought arrow for the early ones, and then you go to the alpha hands. You have something kind of in between. They're a bit more thick at the bottom, they're very pointy, they're very long. I find them very elegant on the Rodania. If you're comparing vintage watches, I mean, you always have the same pedigree. You're always going to have a history that kind of correlates one to the other in a certain way. And it just shows here from the point of view of Omega that decided to actually go with the same dial configuration as the Rodania, okay? Even though the Rodania came earlier than the Speedmaster. The only difference that's really major in the Speedmasters versus the Rodanias is that the Rodania was using a Valjoux 72 and Omega chose the Lemania modified movement, the 321. Overall, we're talking of a movement that has the same configuration visually when it's presented to the eye, but underneath you have a totally different fabrication in terms of movement, totally different companies. Therefore, it's super cool to actually see the difference and the presentation in history. I'm gonna open them really quickly, and I hope I'm gonna be able to open the Rodania. There you go. You're gonna have basically two different movements. Okay, you're looking at the caliber 321 for the Speedmaster, and you're looking at a Valjoux 72 on the Rodania. Obviously, the bridges are assigned Omega and Rodania, but overall, the main difference visually is that on the Speedmaster, you have two pushers that are really close one to the other, whereas if you're looking at any Valjoux 72, you're gonna have here a closer pusher towards the bottom, because right now the watch is basically upside down, but you're gonna have always a pusher that's closer here than here. After so many years, and collectors of vintage watches know that. For me, it's like a sense of seeing those things, even though I don't really know what the movement is in a watch, even though I don't know the watch, I'll know exactly that it's a high grade Valjoux 72 movement versus something that might have been a bit lesser collectible or lesser quality from the time. And that's why when you're talking vintage, you need to know your movements, you need to know what you're talking about, and you need to have that appreciation for what's inside the watch. If you look at the Valjoux 72, I always found it a bit more attractive than the Lemania movement. Personally, I find it more interesting, but overall, you kind of see that the design is very similar. You have a column wheel movement, okay, for the chronograph part, and what's a bit more sexy to me is the fact that the balance wheel is a bit bigger on the Valjoux 72, which displays normally on vintage watches a better timekeeping usually. When we're looking at different watches or chronometer grade watches from the era, normally the bigger the balance, the better the watch. That's a bit of history there, but it's very important for you to see that despite the fact that they share the same dial, the watches look alike, but they're also very, very different inside and out if you look at the fine details. A lot of people would ask me, hey, which one do you prefer? And I'm like, I like them both, and that's why you're collecting. You cannot just have one of them. If you're starting to collect, you're going deep into, a lot of people tell me it's a rabbit hole, whatever. But at the same time, you're never going to regret collecting what you like. When you're not drinking, when you're not running after crazy women, and you're already settled, you had your fun when you're younger, you want something that's stable in terms of collectability, you want something that's fun, that's a bit geeky, if you have that geek part into you, I'd say watch collecting is very, very interesting because it never ends. We'll talk about collecting more in the next video of this Saturday. If you got to the end of the video and you listened to all of it, I want from your opinion to tell me which one is your preferred one. As I said, for me, I have no preferred one. I like them both. But I want to know from you guys what you think. And please comment, please subscribe if you do like what I'm doing. I also want to know if you guys like the new series. It's the first small video. If you do like it, please comment. And I can also talk about certain watches that are in my inventory or certain watches that are in my private collection that I've accumulated over the years. Thank you for watching Wristwatch Wednesday, and I'll see you next Saturday.